Welcome to the Carl Jackson podcast. I'm excited and delighted that you guys are watching us on the TJC network and on Spotify. We are in the top 30% of podcasts on Spotify. We just got that award a couple weeks ago. Shocked me. They said that this show is a rising star show for 2026. So I think it's because of guests that I have with me right now. Would you welcome with me, wonderful person, great soul, great spirit, Miss Barbara With? Did I say her last name right?
Yes, like the preposition with.
Yes, With. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Oh man, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate you doing this. I saw so Barbara has a podcast agent. And sometimes agents pitch me things and I go, no, I'm not interested. No, I'm not interested. I say a lot of I'm not interested. But with Barbara, I was so interested in who she was and what she had to say because I am in a place in my journey where I want to be in complete alignment with truth and not the matrix illusion, right? So, because what truth does, it gives you power. It gives you an opportunity to create the life that you want, right? So, I want to do that, and you can't do it unless you get information. And Barbara has tons of information. But before we get into that information, let's tell people who you are and what you do.
Well, for those who are listening who may not know this world of being psychic, I am a psychic. I'm what we call a channel, which means that I sort of close my eyes and get out of the way and listen. And then I speak from some higher intelligence. Some people call it the Akashic Record. Some people call it the Great Gestalt. Yeah, but whatever the mystery of it is, and what comes out if I'm reading for somebody is just beautiful, compassionate insights into what's going on with you, what's going on internally with you, what's going on around you, and then pathways to be able to, what we say is work for the greatest good, for the highest good of all. And this was a very, very, very long journey for me. I started out as a musician. I was writing music when I was 12. And when I got out of high school, I went right out on the road as a singer. All those decades ago, I was in rock and roll for about 20 years writing music. But I also had a friend whose mom did this psychic work. So he said, come see what my mom does. It's like, what's your mom do? And the first time I sat with her, and it was like she had been in my head and she had been in my home, which was very traumatic as I was growing up. And she just gave me all of this compassionate insight as to how to get along better with my mother, how to take better care of my body. So it wasn't like there were dead people or anything. She just said she was sort of an antenna that could pick up this information and give it back. So when I started doing it spontaneously, this was probably 1987, it was it was kind of like singing. It
Hmm.
was like I could hear these voices and they were so beautiful, and then I could speak them, and I realized, oh, all that songwriting was
The
kind of
same
led me
place.
to that. Yeah. And so
Right.
that's kind of how I got started being that.
So then a lot of what you do is practice makes perfect. You started to work the gift because it's one thing to be able to do it, but it's another thing to be pretty accurate most of the time, which comes with practice and attentive listening. Tell me a little bit about what made you okay, first of all, I want to go into the rock music. So are there groups that we know about? And then what made you decide to go from rock music and writing to just saying, you know what, I really want to focus and hone in on my psychic abilities?
I, from the time I was 5 years old, all I ever wanted to be was a rock star. and I did everything.
I can
I
see it.
dedicate, I
The
dedicated.
Gothic shawl. I see it.
Yeah, I know. And I you can take the girl out of the rock and roll, but
Right.
anyway, so I dedicated my whole life. And at the time, I was coming out of a very, very traumatic childhood. I had addiction issues of all kinds, and it kind of caught up with me. And about the time that I was so exhausted and going into treatment is when I started to kind of spontaneously, it started with writing. When I was writing a letter, and suddenly there was all this incredible information that I wasn't going to say. And because I knew what it was, but it was still kind of shocking. And so I stayed in music. Um, I got out of it and then I got back into it. And no, there wouldn't be any groups. I always say I was world famous in La Pointe, Wisconsin, you know. But I did. I won a lot of awards and I sang all kinds of stuff. And as I started to develop the psychic stuff, I wanted to know what would happen if I sat down in front of a group of people instead of just one person at a time, because people would come for readings on a regular basis, but we never talked about them. It
Hmm.
was just like, here's the stuff. And so I met Kim and Teresa in 1993, and we all started to, we call ourselves the Psychic Sorority. And we started organizing these groups in our living rooms, and I would channel and we would record and then we would transcribe. And what I started hearing in these voices that in my head, which was, you know, like you said, a lot of tests along the way, was that we were going to write this book. And I'd never written a book before. But what happened was, as we got into these groups, the girls asked in one group, well, who are you? Who are you talking? Who's talking to us? And I was uncomfortable because I was an antenna. I didn't know there was anybody else. But what they said was, you can call us angels. Yes, that look on your face was my look. It was like, what? Huh?
Wow.
Angels? What are you
Wow.
talking about?
Right, of course.
And what these angels basically told us at the time, and even today, because I'm still very close to Kim and Teresa, we say to ourselves, what did we think when they told us this? They said, we have this theory, this theoretical process that we think if humans would do this to resolve their conflicts first within themselves, that the byproduct naturally would be that peace would manifest in the environment, you know, as within, so without. You have to
Right.
start with it. But they needed real live humans with real live conflicts to test their theory. And apparently, on some soul level, we volunteered and were chosen to do this. And we were so caught up in the excitement of it and what was happening that didn't occur to us that there was going to come a moment where we were going to have a fight. And then we have to test their theory on an actual conflict. You can't pretend to have a conflict. So, sure enough, we had our first conflict and it was getting worse and worse. And so I said, come on over to the house. And we sat at the table and it started out like normal. You know, when you're trying to work through a conflict with someone, you're saying, well, you did this and then you did that. And I felt this way. And it just kept escalating until finally I said, wait a minute, let's go get a transcript. We just did a big group called conflict resolution. Let's see what they say. And the line that I pulled out was that if you're involved emotionally in a conflict, the root of your part of it is within you.
Say that again. That's really good.
If you're involved emotionally in a conflict, the root of your part is within you.
That's good. Wow.
And as we were in that conflict and I read it, and my head whipped around because I was a victim. I was a rageaholic. I always blamed everybody else. And I thought, what does that actually mean, though? How does that look? And as we kept going to try to resolve this conflict, we kind of cycled on the old way. And then suddenly it's as if God came in and just went poof. And we all went, oh, oh. So I came back to the table and said, okay, here's what I can do better. Here's
Mm.
what I can do. And Kim came back and said, yep, here's what I can do. And there was this, we cried. I'd never in my life had that kind of experience where, you start out, nobody wants to deal with conflict. Nobody. And starting out the old way and then having this remarkable outcome for the three of us. But what was more profound for me was that night I was playing at this hotel in Minneapolis singing, and there had been a waitress there who just was cold as ice. And I didn't care. I go in, I sing, I go home. I walked in that night and she was like, Barbara, oh, it's so good to see you. And she put $20 in my tip jar and she wanted to give me some cassettes of music she thought I'd like. And I was very skeptical. I'm like, what's going on? And then I had that aha moment. This is what they're talking about. If we resolve our conflicts internally, things will naturally change in ways we could never make happen. I could never have sat her down and said, hey, how
That
come you don't like
is
me?
so good. So in other words, when there's any type of conflict in your life, what you're saying is no matter what it is, the root of it is inside of you. No matter what it is. If you're not getting along with your husband or the father of your children or your boss at work, whatever it is, it's something within you that's reflecting into your real life.
Yes,
That
exactly.
is powerful. Okay, so I got so many questions. Okay, so all right, let me try to get all these questions out. Okay, so how does one deal with that within? What did you do differently that made you connect to that situation that was inside of you where you could see it reflect with the waitress? What was in you? How did you deal with it? Maybe you don't want to tell us what it was, but how did you get it out? Like, how did you figure it out and fix it? Because a lot of people know that there's something wrong, but you can't, it's hard to do your own brain surgery. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So how did you do your own brain surgery ultimately?
Well, that particular situation for me was a revelation because I didn't do anything with her.
Okay.
But as I continued to do the channeling and they gave us more and more information about what how this process works. And one of the first things is that emotion that surges through us, they taught us how to look at it more like electricity rather than intellectual stories. Because there's the emotion of anger. If we separate, this is how we've learned, and this became conflict revolution, which is I've been teaching all this time. Is there's the emotion of anger, and then there's angry thought. And you're talking about the matrix. Part of how we have this reality is that we're projecting basically and then perceiving the world. So within our model, there's what we call three human dimensions. And one is emotion, one is intuition, and one is intellect. And what they taught us was when we have a conflict, especially anger, or, this is uncomfortable feelings, to stop and separate out dealing with emotion differently than we deal with the thoughts of anger. So if you can imagine that these are three different energies, they're all smashed together. We don't know. We've never been told this or trained how to do this. But when you stop and how we help people do this is we teach them how to deal with emotion through breath. So you get triggered into anger, and then you get triggered in angry thoughts. And a lot of times, and they were for me a lot, they're about somebody else. You get angry. Well, he's disrespecting me. And we separate those out so that we use our breath work to move the emotion. And then we look at the thought. Okay, what is he doing to me? Well, he doesn't respect me. All right, there's our little sound bite. That's what's bugging us. So let's revolve that to find, where am I not respecting myself?
Mm, girl, girl, you better speak. As they used to say in the Baptist church, you preach it.
I know.
You
I
preaching.
know.
You
And there's
preaching.
so many ways we disrespect ourselves when our
How we
intuition.
eat, how we interact with others, how we don't take pride in our health. There are many things that you disrespect yourself on daily,
And one of
daily.
the biggest ones is that in our model, intuition is the voice of God telling us the next most advantageous step for the good of the whole situation, because that's what God does. And intellect has been given the power to say no to God. So God might tell you, when you get really mad, God might say, step back, take a breath. And your intellect might say, oh, I'm not going to step back and take a breath. I'm going to go after that person. And then you get to make that decision, because intellect doesn't control if you're going to turn right or left. That's the intellect. Like, you put your hand on the wheel because your intellect is saying, yeah, we're going to turn right. And what our work says is that conflict between the voice of God within us and our ego is the root of all conflicts in the world.
I was just going to say I was just getting ready to use the word, it's actually ego. We call it intellect, but it's really ego. I love that. So let me ask you this. Do you feel that ego and intuition would be equivalent to God talking to you versus evil talking to you? Is that a great way to describe it for people who are trying to learn this as an infant?
I think that's a good way to describe it. And how we describe evil, which is actually so non-judgmental, I love it. But it's making decisions for the good of the few at the expense of the many.
Say that again.
Evil is making decisions for the good of the few at the expense of the many. And it starts with these three human dimensions, because if emotion is surging and God is going to tell you what the best thing to do to deal, because all emotion needs to flow, and the ego says no, well, there's one making decisions for its own satisfaction at the expense of the voice of God, of your emotions. Yeah,
So let me ask you this. Do you believe that there is, you talk about God a lot, so I'm assuming you do believe there is a presence or an energy that is good. Do you believe that there's a presence and energy that's evil, or do you think it's just man's ability to create chaos because he does not know how to connect to God?
I would say beautifully said, the second one.
That's
And
good.
and actually, in further work down the line, when I figured out that I could talk to Albert Einstein
Right.
and
We're going to get
came
into
out
that in a second.
with a unified field theory, the what he said, which was so revolutionary, was compassion with a capital C is actually the fifth fundamental force of the universe. It's the God energy. And he has a whole scientific definition of, in the root of compass, what he loves so much in life. So I believe that we are all made of compassion in that
Mhm.
sense, which I just call God, because
Right.
what God is. But God has given us free will. And in doing so, gave us there's a whole range, from Jesus to Hitler, there's a
Right.
whole range, and we have the choice. And that's, I think, what happens to us. We fall into letting ego take over the whole system, and then it really does manifest evil.
Right. So we're gonna go in, I want to get into Einstein and your whole, I guess, journey in that within, a few minutes. But what I want to talk about, since we're talking about evil, we mentioned this last night, a couple nights ago when we talked briefly, but I want to know your thoughts on Minnesota right now. What's going on? What are you picking up? What are you hearing? What do you think it's trying to tell us as a collective? Just go with it. I just want to hear you talk about it.
Well, just briefly, I became an investigative journalist in 2011, and I dug really deep into both sides of the aisle. And I think what I see happening in Minnesota is that people don't know. People generally do not know the whole story, basically about everything.
Right.
But particularly because I started out as a Paul Wellstone Democrat. And then in 2016, all of my conservative friends were going to vote for Bernie. And it was amazing to me because I don't have a problem with my conservative friends. And then when they stole the primary, then suddenly there was all this name calling and disparaging of my conservative friends who were about to vote for Bernie. And it degenerated to a point where I began to study about propaganda and the effects of propaganda on our minds. And conflict revolution, actually, on a very personal level, deals with our personal propaganda. So when you're looking inside yourself, you can find out the lies that you're telling yourself. So when all this happened
That you
politically,
you getting deep. Wow.
I know.
You getting deep, baby girl.
So,
Wow.
so in Minnesota, well, I actually stepped away from really being a political journalist. I still have my Substack, but I had to bring that up after Trump came in. But we can talk about that later. But um, what I see happening in Minnesota, particularly with my liberal friends, is that they're only getting one side of a story. They don't know. It's amazing to me that they are unaware of all the women who have been brutally murdered. They're unaware of um, the massive amounts of criminals who came across the border. They're unaware of the fact that I just learned today that Obama gave Tom Homan, the border czar, whatever, the Medal of Freedom
Oh
for
wow.
what he did.
Oh wow.
And yet he's a Nazi
Right.
now.
Right.
So what I'm seeing is a whole side of our country who thinks they know everything
And
and
then
are
listen.
outraged, and they don't.
Right.
And when I really started to investigate Trump was after January 6th, because I didn't pay much attention to what happened on January 6th. But when I heard that there was this quote unquote insurrection and Trump was allegedly, driving people to be violent, I thought, oh, this doesn't sound right to me.
Right. Right.
And so I did this dive, starting with listening to his whole speech, where, of course, he didn't say anything of the sort. And
Not when I heard it.
I'm also a whistleblower
Right.
in the 2011 Supreme Court election, where there was a recount, and I found the touchscreen poll tape dated March 29th at 1:30 in the morning for an April 5th election.
Oh my God.
So that was my one of my books, Steal This Book, Not My Vote. And I learned so much about election integrity and election fraud that I never thought I wanted to know. And so
Wow.
when he said it was stolen, I thought, yeah, I'm quite sure it was. I'm
Right.
quite sure it was. And now we
Right.
know, of course. But people just they just leapt. My liberal friends just leapt. They left on Russiagate and they leapt on everything. And I started to see their minds being propagandized.
Mm,
And they couldn't, now
mm,
they can't hear, they can't have critical conversation.
right.
And so what I see in Minnesota is a whole generation, a whole side of the country that doesn't understand so much.
Mm,
And here's my point is that I've been a peace activist. I've been on the front lines of protests. I was in DC in 2011 and we were going to march on the Aerospace Museum. I have no idea why. I can't remember. But they trained us. And what they said was if you're not prepared to be arrested, then stay in the back. I did protests at the state capitol where they were trying to take away our First Amendment rights. And they were just, we had the sing along every weekday from noon to 1, practicing our First Amendment rights. And they got tired of it. And so they brought in the LRAD machines and they just would randomly arrest people for about 3 weeks and bring them into the basement. And I said to my friends, I'm scared. I don't want to get arrested. They said, well, don't, save your arrest then. But when you get arrested, especially in that one, you put your hands up and you get arrested. You're there to
right.
protest to get arrested. And
Right.
I finally did get arrested in northern Minnesota in 2021. I was protesting that Enbridge and the government was putting through this pipeline through incredibly sensitive wetlands, including the headwaters of the Mississippi and all the Native American lands that nobody consulted them on. But we sat in chairs, lawn chairs. There were 6 of us, and the police were standing there between us and the oil workers, and
Right.
we educated them. We talked to them. We didn't ridicule them. And when they said, now it's time to get arrested, we put our hands up and we went to jail for 3 days. That's what you do. So
Wow.
when I saw Renee Good, rest her soul, and I learned that she had been training to do this resistance, like a lot of you see the Antifa people doing violent resistance. It's a horrible tragedy. But my thought was, what were you thinking? You have a child, you have children. When you go to get yourself between federal officers, any kind of law enforcement officers, and you resist arrest, you have to pay the consequences. Nobody wants you to get shot. But if you're going to escalate, and the one protest that I thought was the most profound was I was at Standing Rock, which was in South Dakota, and it was a water protection thing. And they were putting the pipeline through their land. And there were 3,000 veterans led by Wesley Clark Jr. And if you know, Wesley Clark was a big general. And his son and 3,000 veterans descended upon the place, and they were going to put their bodies between us and the oil company, and they were going to confront the law enforcement. And they got there, and the leaders sat them down, fed them, and said, no, you're not going to do that. We're here to pray.
Mm,
And so we began praying, and there was a huge snowstorm. And so many people had come to camp who weren't ready for the snowstorm that the 3,000 veterans became search and rescue. But what they did was instead, they did a ceremony where they apologized to the Native leaders for all of the pain that the U.S. military has put their ancestors through. And it was one of the most moving things to see all of these veterans on their knees saying, "We're sorry. We're sorry for what."
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Now, had they done what they said they were going to do, it would have been terrible. People, I'm sure, would have lost their lives
Of
because
course.
the military guys or whoever, there was a lot of different law enforcement from all over. Uh, they were there. They were jacked up too to, be this force. So when I see this happening in Minnesota and I see my friends, these are my friends going out in the streets, carry that sign, have a peaceful protest. But if you're going to be screaming and shouting and interfering with federal officers doing their job, then you have to be prepared. And people aren't thinking of that. They don't think of that. They think they're justified in this. And it's very distressing.
Because they're operating out of ego.
Yes.
There's something within them that just wants to rage. And I used to say that all the time. I used to always say, when someone, especially, you see this a lot in marriages. I'm not married and I've never been married, but I've seen it in marriages where there's a couple and they're doing whatever they're doing, and they're just agitated. They're just, no matter what you do, or no matter what the wife says, or no matter what the husband says, you can tell the other party is just agitated. And it's that thing where the ego tells you that it's the other person. It never tells you what is it within you that's making you look at her this way. What is it in you that make you look at him this way? And it's weird how I looked at the divorce rate the other day, and it's just astounding how horrible the number is. If it wasn't for the fact that I'm secure within myself to understand a little bit of what you're talking about, I would never want to get married, right? Because I would just be like, oh my God, it's the marriage is the issue. But it's not. It's that thing inside of you that you talked about today called ego, that don't know how to read what they're reflecting in society, or in their marriage, or with their children, or at their job, or wherever they're at. They don't know how to reflect that negative thing and say, okay, what is it about me? So it's amazing to me to look at Minnesota and hear you talk. What I'm hearing you say is, we knew that even though we were protesting, we still had to do this respectfully. We still had to do this with a level of diplomacy. We still had to do this in a way where we knew the rules. That is, this could happen, but we're still going to do this peacefully. We're still going to do this with respect for the law, for the people who have to make that decision to arrest us, right? But what we're seeing now is, I'm entitled to be disrespectful. I'm entitled to disrespect the president. I'm entitled. Look, when I was a kid, it didn't matter if the president was Democrat or Republican. You still had to respect the office of it. I mean, we were taught this as kids. My parents taught me that, like, that, they had their views about each side, but it was still a respectful thing to just say, this is the office of the presidency. That's what this is. So we have to show respect to it, because you are honoring yourself, self dignity. But for some reason, that doesn't apply anymore. It's almost like you have dignity by being the most chaotic. That proves dignity if you're chaotic.
Well, and when this began was because it's my opinion that ever since World War II ended, every single president has been leading us into this chaos. Everyone.
I agree. I agree with that.
And so when Donald Trump stepped up, and I watched many, many hours of Donald Trump speaking as a young man, as a middle aged man, as a businessman. And he said the same thing always when they said, well, why don't you run for president? He said, well, if it gets bad enough. And so when he stepped in to run, I did this research about Bernie and Hillary and their relationship to the water. And with Bernie, I found, he was pretty much what you'd think. He helped clean up the Vermont thing and he supported this and that. Hillary was mortifyingly horrible. She supported mining companies that ruined the water. And when I dug down deep enough and got into her deep state ties, I realized, you know what? I would much rather see Donald Trump as president because he doesn't have the deep state ties. He doesn't
Mm,
come into the office with all of this pay to play. And so people were like, well, who are you going to vote for? It's like, I don't know, but I'm not going to vote for her. And if
right,
he wins, I'm going to be okay with it.
right,
And but that's when it started because all those deep state ties knew that he was going to one way or another uncover what they were doing and throw a
right,
wrench. And so they began, and now we know, Tulsi Gabbard declassified documents that showed that Obama created this fake Russiagate narrative, even though the intelligence state told him there was no Russian collusion going on, and because they didn't want him to uncover what he's uncovered. And especially
right,
his second term, spectacularly, maybe sort of accidentally, it's sometimes he's been tripping up, trying
right.
not to let it out, but it's too late. It's too late. I happen to believe that he's operating within the system of the United States of America. He's not, I've never thought he was trying to be a dictator or a tyrant. He's, I think, genuinely trying to deal with this open border, which, by the way, George Soros, with his open society, he has gone around the world opening borders in order to do regime change because this is what it is. It foments dissent between the conservatives and the liberals all over the world. This is what this man has done. So he influencing that side of the aisle, and Joe Biden left the border wide open. And I think Donald Trump is trying to right that situation. I don't love to see us be turned into this military country, but I also know all of the people who have been murdered. I know all of the dangers that have come from it. And I'm not sure what the answer is. But as long as ICE and the immigration laws are in place, whether you like them or not,
Right.
he has a right to exercise those laws.
And a lot of what he exercised, uh, some of that was actually done under Obama's presidency too. If
Absolutely.
you do your research, you'll see that he did some of that, not all of it, but he did a lot of it too. He saw that that was an issue, even in his, you know, political. I have a thing about Obama. I'm not a big fan, but I think he at least was able to see that there was an issue.
But the difference was when he did that, the liberal media
Didn't
dealt
report
with
it.
it well. And I just saw clips on X where, the CNN people rode along with the ICE agents and they reported on it. And when there was a protest, they would sit in front of the White House with their signs and just quietly get arrested.